Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to you all here in the Christofori. My name is Monique Knapen and I am the director of the John Adams Institute. The John Adams Institute is an independent, non-profit organization that independently brings American writers and thinkers to you here in Amsterdam. Tonight, we're proud to bring you Barbara Ehrenreich. Her book, Nickel and Dimed, now translated into Dutch as De achterkant van de Amerikaanse droom, is an important one. Here in the Netherlands and in Europe in general, we are constantly influenced in our own way by American standards and the American way of life. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. I'm not saying that we are moving towards a nickel and dime society, but there are those in both of our societies who see the American dream as an American nightmare. Barbara Ehrenreich undertook very important research to inform this debate, and she turned that into a very readable and remarkable book. I'm delighted that Atlas Publishing had it translated, and I'm even more delighted that we were able to welcome Barbara Ehrenreich here tonight. I'm also pleased to welcome back our friend Jan Donkers as moderator of this evening. We know Jan as a writer, radio broadcaster, visiting professor, and an expert commentator on all things American. In a moment, Jan will introduce our guest of honor, and he'll be back to moderate our discussion after her talk. We'll go straight into the discussion with no intermission. If you have questions, please use the microphones in the aisles. There's one, two. You can also write down your questions if you don't feel comfortable with asking them before a microphone. There are volunteers walking around and can pick up your questions. Please switch off your cell phones, and Jan, can I ask you to take the floor? Thank you.
And a most cordial welcome on my behalf as well, most of all to our distinguished guest, Barbara Ehrenreich. I'm very happy that we have a sellout crowd this evening, which tells us that fortunately not all interest in America has evaporated after November 2nd. Because a very important book it is, the one that Ms. Ehrenreich has written, and which is the subject of this evening, this talk and discussion. Nickel and Dimed, Monique already explained, subtitled On Not Getting By in America, has just been published in the Dutch translation under the very appropriate title, The Flip Side of the American Dream. First of all, I should mention that although this is her first book that made it into Dutch translation, am I correct in that? I couldn't find any previous. Okay. It is not Barbara Ehrenreich's first book by any means. She wrote or co-wrote 11 other books, including The Worst Years of Our Lives, subtitled Irreverent Notes from a Decade of Greed, as well as Fear of Falling, which is subtitled The Inner Life of the Middle Class, and The Mean Season, subtitled The Attack on the Welfare State. And many of these books, as you can tell from the titles, deal with the social problems that have come more and more to the surface in recent years in the United States. Many of you, I presume, will be familiar with one of the most gripping scenes, or tales, I should say, in Michael Moore's previous movie, Bowling for Columbine. The story of the little boy in Michigan who killed one of his playmates with a shotgun that just happened to be lying around in the house. Could there be, Mr. Moore asks, just the slightest connection between this tragic incident and the fact that the boy's single mother was mostly absent during the day and the evening, having to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, leaving her with no time to read to her kids, to give them a sense of safety, of belonging at home, to instill some, yes, I think the word is right in place here, family values. The answer to this question is, of course, strictly speaking, up in the air, because we will never know what would have happened had the circumstances been different. But the question touches at a raw nerve in American society. The same society that stresses family values makes it virtually impossible for millions of its inhabitants to keep up even the semblance of family, and the damage done to the minds and lives of many more millions of kids is, in many cases, irreparable. Many of you will remember the rhetoric that has been part of American folklore for ages, but was reinforced, so to speak, during the Reagan years. According to this rhetoric, the American dream was just around the corner for everybody willing to pull his or her weight. If you happen to be poor, that was just your own fault. Go out, get a job, be part of the superior American workforce, and live happily ever after. People out of work, living on welfare, were demonized as slackers and parasites, subsequently squeezed by the Reagan-Bush administrations, with Bill Clinton, let's not forget that, putting in the final dagger with the welfare reform that he needed for his re-election in 1996. Hundreds of thousands entered the workforce, many of them at the risk of destroying the social fabric of their families. And what happened? They still could not support their families. They had to watch the American dream elude them even more drastically as they saw the rich get richer and their basic standards of life eroded. It is this phenomenon that Barbara Ehrenreich describes in Nickel and Dimed, not as I do now from the relatively secure position of a speaker at a podium and ranting about it every once in a while. No, she described it by entering that workforce undercover and living that life of the working poor, albeit with the knowledge that she would return to her usual life after a while. It is an astounding book. It is a courageous book, and it is at times a book that will make you laugh in order to stop from crying. Ehrenreich describes her life as a waitress in the tropical paradise of Key West, Florida, as a cleaner in Portland, Maine, and most dramatically, in my opinion, an associate, to use that, is that the correct word that they use in the Walmart organization? She was an associate in the Walmart organization. If you have read the book, you will know what that means. Where it means that it's her duty to hang unsold and rejected clothing items back on their shelves. In the draconian work atmosphere of that company, where spying on your co-workers is routine, where going to the bathroom more than an average people would need to do is considered time theft, so that employees have to resort to wearing diapers even, where the only correct answer in your application test to the question, there is room in every corporation for a nonconformist, was totally disagree. Answer just disagree and you're out. Her book is full of expected other insights. When she talks about shit, for instance, out of her experience as a cleaner, she distinguishes between three kinds of shit stains. The remnants of landslides running down the inside of toilet bowls. There are the splashbacks remains on the underside of toilet seats, and perhaps most repulsively, there is sometimes a crust of brown on the rim of a toilet seat where a turd happened to collide on its dive to the water. Now this, I had to laugh, but it's not really a laughing matter. For the person who cleans up all this shit so that the owner of the house can go on making an income that is tenfold or hundredfold the money the shit scrubber earns, it certainly is no laughing matter. And then we haven't even touched on the subject of pubic hair. The most depressing insight this book gives is the effect of all this dreary work and the underpayment that comes with it has on the self-esteem of the worker. I quote, "If you are treated as an untrustworthy person, a potential slagger, drug addict, or thief, you may begin to feel less trustworthy yourself. If you are constantly reminded of your lowly position in the social hierarchy, whether by individual managers or by a plethora of impersonal rules, you begin to accept that unfortunate status." How depressing most of her book may turn out to be, Ms. Ehrenreich remains optimistic in the end. In her opinion, the working poor, who in her view are the major philanthropists of our society, are bound someday to tire of getting so little in return and to demand to be paid what they're worth. One may hope that will be the case. Her experiences are based on the years 1998, between 1998 and 2000, so before the present Bush government came to power, before Walmart became the world's largest corporation in terms of revenues, and forced its competitors to enforce the same conditions upon its workforce, thereby making the whole picture even more depressing. But let's not run ahead of the questions that are raised by this important book about America, about the dignity of people, and ultimately also about the future of labor relations in our part of the world. Because Ms. Ehrenreich's talk will undoubtedly raise more of these questions. The most optimistic sign I see in American society is that fortunately books like Ms. Ehrenreich's continue to be read and considered as a warning sign, maybe. In her case, it even became a bestseller, and that may be the best news to come out of this yet. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and an honor to present Barbara Ehrenreich.
Thank you very much, Jan, for that very flattering introduction. You didn't really have to get into the toilet cleaning, though. I mean, that's my past life. I also want to thank the John Adams Institute and for inviting me, for the honor of being here among this. What are you, nest of American sympathizers? What exactly is the anyway? And for your generous hospitality and the very lovely stay I've had so far in Amsterdam. And I also thank my publisher, and I guess they're hoping you'll buy some books too. Now, I want to say a little bit about my experience working on this book, Nickel and Dimed. And then I want to stand back and look at a larger picture about what is happening in America today. As Jan, you sort of covered some of this because you explained that, well, for me, a big motivation was welfare reform in the United States because, welfare was not a good program. It was very humiliating to the women who had depended on it. But under the new regime, after, quote, reform, there is no entitlement for any kind of cash support for poor single mothers and their children. Everybody has to be in the workforce, whether or not she has anybody to take care of her children. I should mention that the Bush administration has added an interesting new twist to welfare reform. They have discovered a cure for poverty among women, and that is marriage. You laugh. I don't know. It never worked for me, but anyway, it would work, of course, if the Bush administration would draft CEOs to marry women in poverty. Not that they are all exactly marriage material, I should say. But the fact is that most women end up marrying men of pretty much the same social class as themselves. So if you are a woman poor enough to have had to turn to welfare at various times in your life, that probably means a blue-collar man. And that's a group that has really seen its wages eroded in the last 20 years, blue-collar men. So I once sat down to calculate how many blue-collar men a woman has to marry to lift her out of poverty. And it is a number greater than 2, actually, which is illegal. For the sake of bipartisan fairness, though, I should point out that the original welfare reform bill, as Jan mentioned, was signed into law by Bill Clinton. And it is worth noting that, among other things, the bill provided $100 million for so-called chastity education. This was on theory that poverty is caused by promiscuity and other character defects. So just picture this for a moment. Bill Clinton signing into law a bill requiring chastity education. Not, unfortunately, for him. But anyway, the big thing of welfare reform is everybody has to get a job. And if you can't find a husband, again, the question should be really how many jobs? Because what was bothering me in the build-up to welfare reform, is I could look at my local newspaper, I could see what the wages were that were being offered in the help wanted ads. Then I could turn to the real estate page and see what the rents were, and the math did not look good to me. Anyway, I had suggested to the editor of Harper's Magazine that he find somebody to go out and do the old-fashioned kind of journalism, since nobody seemed to be listening to me on this subject. And by old-fashioned kind of journalism, I meant in Europe it'd be the Wohlraff tradition of, but there's an American tradition of that too, from the early 20th century anyway. A journalist actually going out and trying something for themselves and writing about it. Anyway, this editor, to my horror, said, you do it, Barbara. And I wanted more assignments from him, so I said, okay. And this was, I have to say, the assignment from hell, the worst one I've ever had as a writer. I had to try to find the best paying jobs I could get. And there was no cheating on that actually, because I never saw a help wanted ad for a political essayist. Certainly not for a sarcastic left-wing political essayist. And then I just had to try to make ends meet, and I tried this in 3 different cities, and Jan mentioned some of the jobs I held. I should just say a little bit about the process of getting these jobs. In most cases in the United States now, you have to take a drug test first. I don't think anyone in Amsterdam could pass a drug test from my little looking around my hotel area, but anyway. This is, I'll just say, ridiculous. All the academic studies of drug testing show that it does not reduce accidents, it does not increase productivity, it does not reduce absenteeism. And of course, most people aren't actually coming to work high or something. It's, and what, it doesn't measure much. So why do they do this testing? My theory is it's just a little ritual of humiliation to get you in the mood for the job that is about to start. And then there's the personality test. Jan again mentioned some of the questions. This was amazing to me. Most of the questions are pretty easy, like this is an exact quote. In the last year, I have stolen, parentheses, check dollar amount below, worth of goods from my employers. If you can't get that one right, I'd say forget about getting a job. Or this one, which pops up on many companies' tests one way or another, agree or disagree, quote, it is easier to work when you're a little bit high. Very tricky, right? They almost got me on that one, but I actually got a question wrong on Walmart's test. They tell you first there's no right and wrong answers, but of course they're going to grade your personality on a computer. And the question was, agree or disagree, quote, all rules must be followed to the letter at all times. Well, I didn't want to look like I was trying to fake out the test, so I only agreed strongly. The correct answer was totally agree, which tells you something about the expectations in the American low-wage workplace. Now, all these jobs I had were hard. I expected them to be physically hard. They were physically hard, and I'm a strong woman, but I still, at the end of many a day, felt my legs just like rubber under me. What was more of a surprise and a very humbling lesson is that they were also mentally hard. I have a PhD, I've written all those books Jan mentioned. That didn't help. I'll just give you one example. This was Walmart. I was in ladies' wear. I thought, oh, how lovely. I will be giving fashion advice to the ladies of Minnesota. No, that's not how it works at Walmart. My job was to go around with the shopping cart, take the clothes that had been tried on or had been thrown on the floor or hidden in obscure places. Why people like to do this, I don't know. But I discovered a very important thing about retail work. You hate customers. They mess things up. I just wish they wouldn't be allowed in the store. Anyway, but the point of this is that I had to know the exact locations of hundreds of different items so I could put them in their correct places. And then these items would be, circulated, moved around every few days for no other reason, I think, than to convince me that I had Alzheimer's disease. So the important lesson here, though, I never use the word unskilled anymore to describe any job. Every job takes skill and intelligence and a great deal of concentration and deserves our respect. So that was worth finding that out. These jobs were also, though, a lot harder than they needed to be due to the conditions in so many, the American management practices. An atmosphere of distrust and intimidation, absurd rules like no drinking water. And this wasn't the heaviest job I had, the house cleaning job. We could go hours sweating. We were not to have a drop of water pass our lips. Rules like no talking to your fellow employees. That's a pretty obvious one. I don't want anybody organizing it. I did not see the worst conditions either. I think it's fair to say that in some ways, a lot of American workplaces are coming to resemble third world sweatshops. The matter, for example, of bathroom breaks. I was so naive, I thought it was a human right, to go to the bathroom. Sometimes, they were so rare in some of these jobs that I'd actually look back on that drug test with nostalgia. That could be the last time, you get to go. And as Jan mentioned, there are women in American workplaces, and this comes from an academic study of bathroom breaks called Void Where Prohibited. Wonderful title. But there are situations where women wear adult diapers to work because they are not going to get a chance to relieve themselves. And then for real sweatshop situations, I don't think there's anything to match Walmart. They are being sued now in 26 states for making people work beyond their shift without pay. Now, I was warned of this when I was at Walmart, and I just thought that's ridiculous, that's illegal. Well, legal or not, it doesn't matter. Now, that'll be tested in the courts eventually. Also, allegations from Walmart workers in 6 states of being locked into stores overnight and kept to work without pay. Now, that's what sweatshop kind of things. Well, I survived the work, and I'm proud of that. I did not do so well, though, at my goal, which was to make ends meet. That was the hard part. I averaged in all my different jobs $7 an hour, which is also the average earnings, hourly earning of women who have come off of welfare in the United States since 1996. What I did not expect, what completely threw me off, was how high rents would be for the very low-end housing that I was looking for. An example, in Key West, I ended up in a trailer park. A half-size trailer, which was like living in a little tin can, was $625 a month without utilities. Now, $7 an hour, that's $1,200 a month. Take away $200 for taxes. If you have about $700 or so going for housing, utilities, and rent, there is not a lot left for transportation, food, sundries, and anything else. In Minnesota, this was my absolute low point. I could find no place to live. There was a real housing shortage. I was only looking for one room preferably with a fridge and a microwave in it. There was nothing for less than $800 a month in the Twin Cities area. Nothing. I ended up in a so-called residential motel. And the attraction of these to a lot of working people is that you don't need to put down the first month's rent and security deposit to get in. You just come right in. But then you have to pay very high rent. And to live in this place was a real dump. It was filthy, it was unsafe, I felt terribly sorry for myself. Until I began to look around and notice my neighbors and realize I was living in relative luxury because I had a whole room to myself. Other rooms in this residential motel were being occupied by entire families. This is for weeks at a time. But this place, by the way, charged $250 a week, which was more than I was making at Walmart. So ultimately, I could not do it. I had to say, this is not really so easy. And I had some great advantages. I didn't have small children with me to take care of and support. I tried to get my kids to come with me, but there's a certain age when they don't want to go live with mom in a trailer park while she does her weird journalistic experiment. But I have trouble, imagining how, I've seen people, they do it somehow. But if you pay for child care, as opposed to just having a grandma or somebody who can do it, it's probably about $500 a month. Go back to that $1,200 you're earning. If you have $500 for housing, $500 for child care, you're in negative numbers before you buy any food. So that's where the really nightmare problems are. I should also say another advantage I had, which took me a while to realize, is being white. And I was almost, I was really sure in Key West, which has a very diverse ethnically and racially workforce, that I was, as a white person, steered towards slightly better jobs, like waitressing as opposed to hotel housekeeping, on the basis of my skin color, which is a very distressing thing to report about America in the 21st century. Now, how do people do it? Well, obviously, there are two basic strategies. You live with other wage earners, a spouse, a boyfriend, a grown child, or just somebody you met on the job, in some cases, I observed. Or you work more than one job, or you do both. And if I had continued to do this, if this was my life for a longer period, I would have had to find a husband, as George Bush said, or, you certainly had to find people to live with. Now, I worked alongside people who were not getting by any stretch of the imagination. I worked alongside women who were homeless. And the most distressing thing about that is that they did not consider themselves to be homeless, because there is enough homelessness in America now that if you have a vehicle to sleep in, you don't call yourself homeless, right? You're not actually on the street. I also worked alongside women who were not getting enough to eat, certainly not during the workday. And my middle class presumption when I first saw co-workers in a pretty high calorie burning job skip lunch or just have a small bag of Doritos for lunch, my first thought was, oh, she's dieting, how silly. Well, what did I know? It emerged they had no money and very little food at home. Now, one thing that became very clear to me from this experience was how meaningless the official poverty level in the United States is. According to the official poverty level that the calculations of federal government issues, only 12.5% of Americans are in poverty. But that official poverty measurement is based entirely on the cost of food. This was devised in the early 60s, this formula. There hasn't been very much inflation in food prices in America. The inflation, the big inflation, has been in housing and, of course, health care. And that's not, taken into account at all. There are attempts number of attempts recently to come up with a more realistic numbers, looking at the cost of housing too. And the most recent study, which was supported by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, very mainstream, is that 25% of American families are actually in poverty in the sense of not being able to meet basic needs with what they earn. And this poverty rate has, perhaps no surprise, risen every year for the past 3 years. Especially strikingly last year among single mothers. So much for the great success of welfare reform. And one thing I didn't say in Nickel and Dimed, which I will try to make up within my next book, which is going to be about white-collar unemployment, is that it's not only the so-called unskilled and the the not formally educated who end up in this situation. The corporate world in America has been buffeted by layoffs and, scattered firings at quite high levels. And I've been talking to a lot of these people who had been in relatively high positions in finance or marketing or management, who are now looking at jobs in Circuit City or Walmart for $8 an hour or something like that. So it is not simply an issue of failure, lack of higher education. Well, turning the page a little bit, why dwell on the most miserable 25% of the population? I am now trying to convince my publisher to give me a multi-million-dollar advance so that I can go undercover amongst the rich. And I hope my Dutch publisher will want to contribute to this. So I can go, check out that lifestyle, the spas and the yacht clubs and the charity balls. And it would actually, I thought about this for a while, but I could never figure out how I could pass in this case. But it would be the perfect sequel to Nickel and Dimed, or what is the title in Dutch again? Well, the book in Dutch. Because poverty doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is the other side of the enormous concentrations of wealth that have built up in America in recent years. We are the most class polarized of the industrialized nations now, the United States. One small indication, but a kind of a sad one, this last Christmas shopping season, that's the big time for retail. It was very disappointing at Walmart. It was very disappointing at the discount stores that the poor shop in. It was great in the luxury stores, Saks Fifth Avenue. In other words, even at Walmart, the prices are becoming too high for people who have to live on Walmart-type wages. Now, the connection between the wealth of the few and the poverty of so many is pretty obvious. Where does that wealth come from? And here again, I will pick on Walmart. They are the biggest corporation in the world, as well as being the biggest private employer in the United States. But, the other side of my life, say, at Walmart, is this. Forbes magazine, the business magazine, every year lists the 10 richest individuals in the United States. And every year, 4 or 5 of them have the last name Walton. That means they are children or nieces and nephews of the founders of Walmart. It's a family fortune of about $100 billion. Or the CEO of Walmart, Lee Scott, USA Today reported that in 2002, if you included his stock options, he earned $66 million. Compare that to my wages at Walmart. This led to another insane calculation. I would have had to work at Walmart for over 5,000 years to make as much as he makes in 1 year. And the sad thing is, in 5,000 years, I probably wouldn't get a promotion. Because another thing about Walmart is they don't like to promote women, which is why they're facing a nationwide class action suit for sex discrimination. Now, I'd say that I think ours has become not only an economically polarized society, but I would say a sort of morally polarized society. At the bottom of the corporate ladder, remember those personality tests? You're supposed to be a complete straight arrow. You would never do a bad thing. You would never, steal a pencil from your employer and so on. Meanwhile, at the top of the corporate ladder, we now know from Enron, Adelphia, WorldCom, HealthSouth, Hollinger's Publishing, and now Fannie Mae, just to list a few. Apparently anything goes has been the rule. And reading about these corporate scandals, I would think back to the Walmart orientation video that they show to all new workers. That it's about why you shouldn't steal. It's very exciting because there are drums in the background, and they show this cashier who reaches into the cash register, he takes some bills, stuffs them in his pocket. The drum beats get louder, cops rush in, they drag the man out, and the voiceover says, "He stole $400. He went to prison for 4 years." And you go, oh, wow, I'll never do that. Meanwhile, at Tyco Corporation, the CEO was indicted for stealing $600 million. While he was under criminal investigation, his company kindly offered him $45 million as a severance package. The lesson here is, if you're going to steal, steal a lot. That's how it works. This is fairly routine. Martha Stewart is in prison, but she's small potatoes. She only, all it was involved was $45,000. Insider trading on $45,000. That's so, if I didn't hate her for all those little centerpieces and ways she figured out to make women waste their time, if I didn't hate her for that, I would be leading the Free Martha Stewart movement. Meanwhile, Dick Cheney's old company, Halliburton, has overcharged the government $1.8 billion, with a B, dollars, for its services that it's provided or not provided to troops in Iraq. And no one is going to go to jail for that. Well, in the last couple of years in the United States, we were supposed to forget all these issues, poverty, economic inequality, corporate scandals, and concentrate on one thing, Iraq. Now, there's a lot of debate about why the United States actually did that invasion. Now we hear, well, it was democracy, and it's wonderful that they voted. I do wonder, though, what they voted for, and we'll find that out, I guess. Although then you have to wonder in the United States, because we've lost some democracy ourselves in the last few years. If they're giving it to another country. There was a point when they were talking about letting the Iraqis use the American Constitution. And I thought, hey, fine, give it to them. We're not using it anymore. That's going to have it. But whatever their reasons were, the effect of the war, as my friend and sometimes collaborator, political scientist Francis Fox Pisman has written, the effect of the war has been to distract from these policies. Bush's domestic policies. And the policy, of course, that most needs distracting from is his policy of tax cuts for the wealthy, for the people who earn over $200,000 a year. How is he planning to finance these tax cuts for the very wealthy, combined with, say, the huge costs of fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq? Well, with cuts in social programs, and not only for the poor. Social Security is on the dock now, the public pension plan for older Americans. The trouble is you could eliminate all spending for the poor and not be close to what you would need to cover the deficit now. So this has been a policy of upward redistribution of wealth with gaudy patriotic spectacles to distract from it. We are becoming, in the United States, a society ever more divided between the haves and have-nots, between the people who live in gated communities and the people who live in tenements and trailer parks. This is not the image of America in the world today, and I think it's important to say this. I mean, we are largely seen and widely despised throughout the world as a military behemoth, capable of destroying small nations or taking them over at will. What is not so visible from outside our borders is the weakness behind that military power, the poverty that extends even into our armed forces. Because, in the absence of a draft, when it's a volunteer army, who's going to volunteer? It's people who have no prospect of going to college. Young people like Jessica Lynch, remember when they tried to turn her into a great hero because she was captured for a while by Saddam's forces. She didn't want to be a soldier. She said that. She didn't want to be a soldier at all. She wanted to be a school teacher, but couldn't afford college. And tragically, this is true of some of the young women involved in the Abu Ghraib abuse. This was not their first choice, but this is what you do if you're a working class person. And this produces what I think, looking at a sort of at a historical distance, is a interesting historical anomaly. Because ever since the introduction of mass armies in Europe in the 17th century, governments have generally understood if you're going to have mass armies, you have to somehow take care of the class of people that provides them. So that the European welfare states, a lot of them rose or were strengthened or grew a lot after the Second World War. The rather smaller American welfare state goes back to the Civil War with some increase after the Second World War. And this has been the way of the world, that kind of militarism has meant that you had to provide some sort of support to people. So we are embarked in the United States on what may turn out to be a very risky experiment a warfare state without a welfare state. And this, it's tragic. You see young people who come back from Iraq, although it's hard to get out of there, and come back to jobs paying $7, $8 an hour, to enormous debts, and to poverty. However, they also come back knowing how to use explosive and guns, and we have had, quite a bit of crime that has come out of the first Iraq War. Now, I just want to end by saying a little bit about the movement for change in a progressive direction in the United States, and I can only just give you a tiny thumbnail impression. There is a movement for change around these issues of economic inequality in the United States, and the scandalous fact that a quarter of Americans do not earn enough to support their families at any level of decency or security. But this movement is not so visible, I think, again, from the outside because it's very local, or at least state-based. Look, we're not going to get big changes at the national level for another 4 years. In fact, sometimes I think I'm glad that Bush isn't very concerned about poverty, because if he did get concerned about poverty, what would he do? Bomb it? This is, so we have the so-called movement for a living wage, which means trying to pass local laws that require businesses that are doing business with a city or county government to pay enough to live on in that area. Now 123 cities and counties in the United States have passed such laws, which represents an awful lot of grassroots effort. Secondly, in addition, there are 13 states now have given up on waiting for the federal government to raise the minimum wage and have raised their own minimum wages. Most recently, Florida in November. And this is interesting, because in Florida in November, Bush apparently got 52% of the vote. That was a little question, but anyway, let's say he got 52%. 72% of people, though, voted to raise the Florida minimum wage. So that gives me a great deal of hope that even people who may, have been thinking, well, Bush is protecting us from terrorism, recognize the fundamental injustice in our economy. And thirdly, there is a very vigorous movement among college students to raise the wages of workers on college campuses. And that's a lot of people. The janitors, the food service workers, the clerical workers. And campus after campus, this has become a major focus of agitation by students. Students saying that, they don't feel like learning in a classroom that they know was cleaned during the night by someone who may not be making enough to feed their children on. The final thing I want to say is that I am alarmed and saddened by the embrace of U.S. welfare reform policies by conservatives in a great many countries, from Israel to Scandinavia to New Zealand, to give some examples. Additional social benefits like health insurance for people. But it did not do anything. It worsened the situation of the poor in the United States. And of course, welfare reform has a long-term effect of lowering wages further by pushing more people into the workforce. So I just want to finally say, if nations around the world adopt American-style welfare reform, I hope they will learn something else from the United States on the importance of building grassroots movements in defense of the increasingly impoverished working class. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. make room for this. I want to start with a few minor points, some of which you mentioned also. One of them, you mentioned that stealing in high places is no big offense, but stealing small amounts is. What about drug testing? What about the phenomenon, the humiliating experience of being tested for drugs, peeing in a jar, sometimes with the door open? At what levels is that that common practice? Is it also common practice in Wall Street or at Microsoft?
Well, the person who did some work on this is my son, who's a freelance writer, Ben Ehrenreich, who you'll be hearing more of, and he did 2 years ago a big article on this, and he found that it is diminishing among white-collar workers and increasing among blue-collar workers.
So
Yeah.
there's no need for it.
No need for it. What do you mean?
I mean, no need for testing. Just as there's no need for testing in the lower.
Well, I know. Yeah. No, I mean, the sensible kind of test, especially for jobs that involve a lot of life and death responsibility, like a school bus driver or an airline pilot, would be on the spot. Check when they show up for work that they're not drunk or high in some way. That's when you need to know. And unfortunately, there are too many instances where, they don't detect that.
One other small thing that you did not mention, but which intrigued me greatly, in your days as a waitress in Key West, you discovered some very unpleasant things about the generosity of Christians, didn't you? Could you tell a bit about that?
Well, this is not a scientific study, but I found, and my coworkers agreed, that people who are very visibly evangelical Christians are terrible tippers. I don't know what that's about. Never figured that out.
Well, maybe they want to entice you to work harder for you.
Well, or maybe they think the Lord will take care of us. I don't know.
I have a quote here from your chapter about scrubbing Maine, and you have a discussion with Laurie, one of your co-workers, who at 24 you mentioned has a serious disc problem and an $8,000 credit card debt, and you ask her about if it disturbs her working in a very posh mansion and working for this ridiculously low wage, and she answers, "All I can think of is like, wow, I'd like to have this stuff someday. It motivates me, and I don't feel the slightest resentment because it's my goal to get there where they are." Isn't that
That's the American dream.
Yes, exactly. That was going to be my question. Isn't this a thing that essentially, or maybe gradually, distinguishes Americans from Europeans?
Yes, possibly. Now, I think she was sadly deluded in that she thought that some of the houses we cleaned were normal middle-class houses when they were actually the very wealthy. She had never seen, I think, the normal middle-class level. So, and if you watch TV, too, a lot of the interiors are much nicer than people ordinarily, all these Friends-type people, they have these huge apartments. They have apartments that would cost, over $1 million in New York City. So it's all unrealistic. And if you're getting all your information about the upper classes, from cleaning the houses of the very rich or from watching TV, you might have very exaggerated standards of what's normal.
Yeah. Another thing that struck me is in your chapter about Walmart, and I have a few more questions about Walmart and their practices later on, you mentioned while you were working there what you call a new impatience in yourself. And you said that you might. Why does anybody put up with the wages we paid? And you mentioned that you might expect a bit of grumbling, some unrest, but you can detect none of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a deeper reason behind the fact that you cannot detect that there's none of that? Is that just a discouragement of Walmart's policies of labor activities, for instance?
Well, part of it is fear that the company doesn't have to, you know, I mean, people know that they could be fired for any sign of discontent. It turns out, I have since learned from Walmart insiders, that Walmart does have forms that managers keep on the likelihood of individual employees being sympathetic to unions. Well, you know, lists of things to check off, like frequently has complaints or anything like that. And it's so easy to be fired that there is a lot of fear. And why, you know, and then I would think, well, so get fired, you know, stand up for your rights, get fired. But then I had to slowly realize that if you are earning such a small amount of money, losing a few weeks' pay in between jobs, assuming you could quite readily get another job, could be catastrophic in itself. You know, you are really living paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. So the poverty is itself a form of a discipline.
Mm-hmm. Also at Walmart, you describe how you begin to feel at a certain point that you have at least planted a seed of dissent there, but you give up. The results are negligible. Is that because of that reason also?
Well, no, actually things changed at the very end of my stay at Walmart, because this was near Minneapolis, and the hotel workers went on strike in Minneapolis. And it was front page, you know, banner headlines. It was on the TV news, and there's always a TV going on in the break room at Walmart. And I would get in conversations with people about that, or people would bring it up. And I'd say, hey, these hotel workers make more money than we do, and they're striking for more. Mm-hmm. And just, you know, then you begin to see a spark coming into people's eyes. Just the example that, yes, people can change their lives by coming together, by banding together.
But you mentioned that in your talk that, I think in 26 states you mentioned there is lawsuits being brought before the local judges in Walmart, strike-breaking activities.
No, this is for failing to pay workers.
Oh, I see.
Forcing them to work without pay.
And but they are ferociously anti-strike.
Oh, yes.
What are their practices in that respect?
Well, first, when you're in that orientation session that goes on for 8 hours, one of the videos they show you is about the evils of unions. And that's one of the hardest things I ever had to sit through, because it's you know, these people will just take your money. They're extortionists. If you join a union, you'll lose everything you have. Well, what do you have to lose is my thing, and that you can't answer back. So that starts with that.
And is there some correlation between the corporate-friendly attitude of the present government and the fact that they are able to pursue these anti-union policies?
I don't know how direct it is, because this goes back to before, you know, this was under Clinton, 2000, when I worked there. No, it's not that direct in effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I should mention that during this hour, the audience, of course, is welcome to ask questions. There are a couple of microphones here. There are 3 at least. And if you feel if you feel too embarrassed to ask a question personally, please write it on a little piece of paper, hand it to the front line, and the front line will hand it to me. You mentioned that the cost of housing is the decisive factor in keeping the working poor. Is there a reason why the cost of housing is not included in the indexes for poverty?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I could give you paranoid kinds of explanations, but I have no. You know, and it's funny because even the government acknowledges how ridiculous that their measures are, and for certain purposes, you know, use a much higher income to as an eligibility level for getting some kind of benefits. But no, they keep doing it, and it's you know very reassuring. 12.5% poverty. It's not too bad, is it? You know.
Now, you mentioned the European situation, and I should add that we should not congratulate Europe too much, and blame or depreciate the American system too much. After all, the founder of the American Studies program in the Netherlands, Professor Den Hollander, he once said that the reason why we most of the things that we abhor in the United States is the fear that, or the knowledge that all those things will come to pass on our shores a couple of decades later. So that ties in with your remarks about how, for instance, welfare reform will come to be in effect in this country as well, maybe.
Well, you have some choice in that, though. I mean, you don't have to just accept this. I mean, you can.
But do you think there's a case to be made that competition will force private companies, European companies, to adopt policies as the ones that you described at Walmart, even more than they are already doing, anti-strike regulations, for instance?
You mean like European companies?
Yes.
Well, it
Because
just depends on how much resistance there is from the public sector and from trade unions. You know, I'd like to think that there are some top business people who see how short-sighted it is to crush your workers so much. Because, you know, people perhaps would work better if they felt they were being treated as valuable assets of the company rather than as a disposable resource, which is how they are treated now. Also, you know, what happens is the whole American dream was kind of based on Henry Ford's idea, and of course the pressure of unions. But you know, he recognized you had to pay your workers enough. He had to pay enough so that they could buy Ford cars. That's how it was going to work. That's how capitalism could work. And he was very explicit about that. And that was the social compact until well in the post-World War II years. That you should have a working class that could buy the refrigerators and the television sets and the Fords and so on. Now, they have lost sight of that. And what I thought was kind of a really interesting omen was that I would talk to workers at Walmart who could not buy the clothes at Walmart. And Walmart's prides itself on being able to make a lot of things available to people who couldn't otherwise buy things. But when you're paying so little that your own employees can't buy the stuff, then you are, I think that economic terms is, you're facing a, crisis of accumulation, crisis of, anyway, who's going to consume it?
Uh-huh.
We can't all shop at Saks Fifth Avenue and Nordstrom's and buy the luxury goods. That's not going to support an economy.
I have a handful more questions, but there's one from the audience over there.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
I was just in hearing what you were talking about this evening and reading at least the first part of your book, which I will now go home and read the last part of your book. I was trying to think of the situation here in the Netherlands, and of course, it's not very comparable because of the welfare state that still does exist despite the recent attempts to undermine it. But I do research amongst undocumented migrants here in the Netherlands, and really a lot of the things that you have said today about the workers of Walmart could be really said about these undocumented migrants here. And if you follow the political debates here in the Netherlands, one of the main reasons to not make undocumented migrants documented is the welfare state. Namely that it would cost too much to the government of the Netherlands to allow people to come here from mainly developing countries and work here with a legal status. So I was just wondering if you could reflect on that, especially given that you have a situation, well, you're of course advocating for more welfare state reform in the United States, better welfare state reform, but how that would, well, if you could maybe link these two things that are these dynamics here in Europe in any case, that the working class and the exploited working class here in Europe is more and more the undocumented migrants, but how does this then jive with a welfare state?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are many undocumented workers and minors as well in the United States.
Yeah, no, that's a hard question, a good question and a hard one. I was involved in the last few months with a group in Indiana that a workers' organization, which includes some of the building trades unions, you know, the plumbers and the electricians and those guys, and they were complaining because construction work that used to go to them, like a big project at the University of Indiana, was given instead to undocumented Mexican workers who were paid about $6 an hour and driven from sunrise to sunset with accidents. And the amazing thing that happened there, was that they finally understood that they had to not just complain about, oh, these damn Mexicans are coming in taking our jobs, but they had to reach out to them and help them get organized for better conditions. Because that, what makes the immigrants in the United States a danger to the native-born working class is that they can be exploited so much. And they didn't come to the United States to be exploited. They came to earn decent money. So I'm answering in a very American-centered way, but our biggest source of undocumented immigrants is Mexico. And if you wanted to do something about that, you would be concerned about the Mexican economy. And NAFTA was bad for the Mexican economy. It really undermined Mexican agriculture, leaving a lot of people without their traditional livelihood, who then become, who are mowing lawns in Los Angeles now, or being meat packers in Iowa, or something like that. So obviously the long-term approach has to be international. And in my country, that seems to a lot involve looking at Mexico and our relationship to it. But, in the end, yes, workers of the world unite.
Well, it happened in the 70s with the fruit pickers in Florida. In California, I should say, the Cesar Chavez. That was a big movement. It had some success.
Oh yeah, no, we still have successful labor organizing drives. Yeah.
Any related questions? Yeah.
Hi there.
Hi.
Despite my accent, I'm not American. I'm Canadian, but I did live there. My question is to get your comments on Lee Scott in the news about 3 weeks ago. The CEO of Walmart went on a big PR campaign to dispel the rumors that Walmart is a bad employer. My question is, obviously their share price went down and it cost them billions, so that's why he's doing this. But what has happened is that Target, which is the second largest retail chain, people are going there. So my question is it not trading one evil for another?
Yeah.
And the second thing is also, if you look at the 50s and 60s, for example, with the Black Civil Rights Movement, they were so powerful because they used consumer action as a way to actually agitate for social change. Why isn't this happening in the U.S. now, do you think?
Well, another hard question. I think it would be hard to boycott Walmart. It is so central to the American economy, and there's no point in calling a boycott if you're not actually going to do it. You're right that other stores like Target and Kmart are abusive to their workers too, but I don't think in such a systematically evil fashion somehow. What H. Lee Scott was responding to is that now Walmart is running into trouble when it tries to open new stores. The best known case recently was in Englewood, California. and where Walmart was met with strong community resistance. And this is a relatively low income Latino and black community. And people were against it for all kinds of reasons, and in the end Walmart was beaten, couldn't open the store there. So that's what they're scared about. I think they open a new store like every 10 seconds. No, I forget how often, but it's every day or so. Another crazy calculation. I once tried to figure out how long it would be before the entire earth was covered by Walmart stores and their parking lots, and the day is coming. But so if you stop there, what we've begun to do is challenge their expansion. And the strategy is to bring together the environmental groups who don't like what it does to communities, the women's groups who are angry about the sex discrimination, and labor.
There's later on. Yes. There are some interesting statistics in this. Did you read this article about Walmart in the New York Review?
A while ago, so you have to remind me.
Because it has some very interesting statistics. It says that for a 200-employee Walmart store, the government is spending $108,000 a year for children's health care, $125,000 a year in tax credits and deductions for low-income families, and $42,000 a year in housing assistance. It report estimates that a 200-employee Walmart store costs federal taxpayers $420,000 a year, or about $2,000 plus per Walmart employee. This doesn't sound like free market capitalism to me.
Right, it's not.
It looks like subsidized
Oh yes,
capitalism.
of course, yeah. And that's now becoming more and more of a point in California, in Georgia, and some other states against Walmart expansion, because the state governments are saying, whoa, we know that you have such low wages that you create a greater burden on the public sector. This was brought home to me, not the public sector part, but when I was working at Walmart, I tried to get emergency food aid from a public/private charity I went to. And the social worker didn't seem to hear anything I was saying. She would ask me a question, and then 2 minutes later she seemed to have forgotten what I had told her. And at the end she said, I'm sorry, I just had somebody else from Walmart here yesterday. I thought, aha. People from Walmart going to a food pantry to get emergency food help. This is putting a burden on a community when you have people who cannot make it on their wages.
When you talk about the expansion of Walmart, you mentioned that there are other food stores, competitors of them, that offer higher wages and more benign policies. But isn't the fact that they have to drop those wages in order not to be elbowed out of the market? So, in other words, is that?
Oh yeah, in fact we talk increasingly about the Walmartization of America and the world if they keep going. That it's not just this one company; it is a process that they bring into play, holding down wages as low as possible so that competitors have to lower theirs too. That's what the big grocery workers' strike was about in California a year ago, because as a preemptive move, the grocery stores that already were in California started lowering their wages when they found out Walmart was moving heavily into the state. Mm-hmm. But it's not only the wages paid to the workers. I mean, throughout the world, it's the pressure on suppliers. Because of Walmart's economic clout, they can say to the manufacturer of shirts in Bangladesh, no, we want them for half that price. And if you won't do it, we'll go somewhere else. They have that power, that purchasing power. So that supplier in Bangladesh has to then lower his or her wages to meet Walmart's demands. So it's a global, it's like a dynamic that's hard to stop.
And if you mentioned that some states individually adopt a higher minimum wage, is Walmart complying with that?
Yeah, they have to. I mean, the way they get around it.
They have to, but do they?
Well, I don't know. See, I think they're going to be, the government will always be able to check what the wage is on the paycheck because taxes have to come out of that. What Walmart had been doing, as I said, was just this kind of business where a manager would come to somebody who's working and say, go check out, go punch out, I've got a lot of work for you to do. In other words, your work day is over, now you start in as a volunteer for the company, you know.
And that is very, very hard to prove, is it?
It's being documented. In fact, this is something that goes on in a lot of workplaces. There was a big article in the New York Times about this recently. Shaving off the time, either by altering the computers that print out people's paychecks, or by making you come in 15 minutes early. Like in the house cleaning job, we had to come in 40 minutes earlier than the clock started for our pay that day. This is not uncommon.
So they may comply with the minimum wage requirements, but they will keep on forcing their workers to work longer, and also, as you mentioned, to they understaff the several departments in order to keep the crunch on them, to put the pressure on them. Is that also a policy that will become more pervasive as more states adopt a higher minimum wage?
Perhaps, but I think we will fight back. You know, I
Who
think
are we?
We. I mean, the Service Employees International Union, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, are coming together and will probably be announcing soon a major drive to organize Walmart. And they will be expecting the people who are motivated by environmental concerns or just the integrity of communities concerns to join in that. So, you know, there's resistance here.
Well, I'm happy that you're optimistic because it's hard to be optimistic these days. The lady over there had a question.
I was wondering how Walmart hired you. Were you honest about your motives? How did this?
She said,
when people asked you what your background was or where you came from, did you go to college? How did you deal with those questions?
There's remarkably little interest in those questions. You have to fill out an application form in all of these places, but what they really want to know in it is, are you a legal resident of the United States? Have you committed a felony? And when can you start working? That's about it. And I would always put down some college. You know, I didn't put down a PhD in biology because, you know, the real reason for not putting that down is that they think, what is the matter with her? What kind of serious drug or alcohol problem does she have that she's looking for this job? So, no, nobody ever showed any curiosity.
Well, but yet, we'll get about that when we talk about your next book. But yet you see in checkout lines in supermarkets, for instance, in Texas, you see men obviously that have had a $1,000 job maybe, and they're stuffing bags now. So they are, in that case, the distrust of where are they coming from maybe is not the case.
No, I think we accept that there is a lot of mobility, downward mobility too. The work I was doing all this year had to do with white-collar unemployment. And I was struck by how many people who had fairly good positions, like $90,000 a year, which is very, very good, who lose their job and gradually exhaust their resources, sell their possessions on eBay, one step after another, sell the house, and then end up at, you know, one of these retail jobs or something.
Who was first, you or you?
I'm not sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to the last question. I'm really curious. I'm American myself. I've lived in Holland for 10 years. I did my degree in organizational psychology here. It's a lot cheaper in Holland to do your degree. I was curious to know if you were asked anywhere what your age is.
I think they can't ask that.
They can't ask that?
I think they can't, right.
In Holland, they have it in the advertisements. That's still really.
I don't think they can ask. Yeah.
And there's also a very low percentage of women on the workforce that are like 50 over here in Holland. Yeah, and men.
I think it's pretty high. I know in the United States, more and more people work on past 60, 65.
Yeah. Supreme Court. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Gentlemen over
Right. Like there are these great jobs at Walmart as people greeters. These are for elderly people. And if you're a people greeter, you get to stand at the door and smile at everybody as they come in, and you get $6 an hour. You get less than the people on the floor. And the real function of those people greeters, I learned, is it puts the customers on notice that you're being watched and don't steal anything. You know?
Gentleman over there.
Hi. My question has to do not so much with the problem, which, I mean, it's not that difficult to bemoan the degree of increasing income and earnings inequality in the United States compared to other countries, and the high level of poverty and so on. What I would like to raise as a question is your solutions, which strike me, particularly from a European perspective, where there's a huge debate going on right now about labor market flexibility and the role of social protection and so on. What strikes me about your solutions is how old-fashioned they seem to be to me. The solution is more unions and higher minimum wages, both of which are being questioned very seriously in Europe in their effects, even though it's the American union movement that doesn't have a particularly good record in terms of affecting earnings inequality positively. Other union movements have done better than the American union movement, but the Americans have not, for reasons that you can argue about. But the more important one of the two solutions that you propose is a minimum wage, and the obvious counter argument to that solution is that the higher you put the minimum wage, the less likely it is that those jobs will still be there. And is there not a good chance that in the absence of a solid welfare system, those people who are now working for poverty wages may not be working at all and be in even more abject poverty than they are now? What do you say to that kind of objection?
Well, this is the objection that is brought up by conservatives a lot. Empirically, it doesn't work out that way, though. Empirically, those parts of the country that have higher minimum wages have not lost jobs. No, I'm telling you, it's an empirical thing. And, that perhaps because the increases are not big enough to cause that yet. Now, I think, we do have a larger vision of social change. I just gave you a tiny sample. I mean, we would be nice to have a welfare state. It would be nice to have health insurance, housing subsidies, and all those things. So you weren't so focused on the wage itself. And, I worry about having everything tied to that wage because, sometimes unemployment is high. There are people who perhaps shouldn't be in the workforce, perhaps should be home with children or with elderly parents that they're caring for or something. Don't want everything to be tied to that. But these are just some of the things we're doing now, focusing on wages.
You just don't see a solid social protection system as a feasible.
Oh, solid what?
As a solid social protection system as a feasible objective for a political movement in the United States.
Well, right now, our big fear is that Bush will eliminate Social Security, or privatize it,
yeah.
And which is assumed to be a step toward eliminating it. So that's our fight. But our fights have been so defensive. We fought against welfare reform, a strange conglomeration of feminists, Catholic bishops, and fought welfare reform against that. Now it's Social Security, but it's all been defensive, sadly.
Lady over there.
Hi, yes. I have, two questions, all related to what people can do now. For those of us who might be a little bit more socially conscious, what kinds of things can we do to sort of help the situation? And for those people who are really in poverty and facing this, what sort of stopgap measures do you think that they can take until we've made significant progress to help them?
Are you an American?
Yes.
I thought so.
Yeah.
You speak English, that's how I could tell.
Yeah.
So what can you do as an American when you're back in
Yes.
America?
Yes.
Because one thing you can do here for Dutch people is hold on to what you have, please. I'm not saying that because I'm so concerned about the Netherlands, but because it's important to us to be able to say there are countries that are more civilized. You know, there are ways to do it. And it's terrible to get a sort of mocking answer from some conservatives. Oh, they're all destroying their welfare states too. It can't work anywhere. So please, hold the line here. But when you return to the United States, you could get involved in one of these movements for a living wage. There are also a lot of grassroots groups that work on housing policy, child care policy. You know, there are ways to plug yourself in. But it is local, so it's not so easy to say, well, there's just one big thing that we all do.
And what do you think that people can do who are in this impoverished situation?
That question.
What sort of stopgap measures can they take until we
There's
sort of help
not. I mean,
them?
there's not. I don't think there are big individual solutions. You know, the individual solution that is always held out is, well, why don't they go to college? Why don't they go to university and get a higher education? Well, the answer to that is pretty easy. It's very expensive to get higher education in the United States. The cost of it is going up and up and up. Subsidies are declining. Access for the working class is shrinking. So that mode of individual self-advancement is closing for many people. I think ultimately you have to band together with other people for change in your community and workplace.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The gentleman over there.
Oh, actually, you're next. All right. Yes, I'm also American and damn glad to be working here. The white collar here is much, much better than in the States. But something you mentioned earlier suggests kind of a way forward. You said that Walmart was actually a net drain on the state's resources because people were having to go on welfare, on emergency food, and so on. It almost suggests that locally or regionally, a company should be required to submit an economic impact statement, like an environmental impact statement, showing how it actually can be a net benefit, if it can be at all. And also something addressing what the woman said, we just said to the woman before me, about organizing. Most of the votes for Bush came from the red states, which were the poorer states. And I think the Democrats did a bad job, or just weren't able to put across that these people in the red states are voting for the very people who are robbing them. And that also suggests a way forward as well to help get that message in everyday language.
But
Not really a
overall,
question.
you know, people who are more likely to vote Democratic, the poorer they are, and Republican, the richer they are. And that trend did not really change. Wait, what was all the rest of that question? Oh, yes, you wanted some kind of accountability from corporations. What are you, a socialist? Yeah, but this, you know, no, we should have apply the same standards to the corporations. But this, you know, we do talk about this all the time, is why this unaccountability? Why do we, the original idea of a corporation was it was chartered by a state to do a particular thing. And then charter was supposed to run out. And now it's like perpetual immunity from personal responsibility for the men at the top, or occasionally women, and nothing about impact on communities, environment, or workers, nothing. And of course, that is a long-term thing we have to, keep addressing, keep raising.
Gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Maier. I would like to put forward an observation on your book. When I read your book, I was struck by the fact that when you start describing your experience as a cleaning, in a cleaning job, You start by outlining that you've almost never hired a cleaner yourself, where you don't do this in the other jobs. I was just wondering if this is if you felt compelled to say this, to criticize these kind of jobs, or in other words, if this cleaning company would pay normal wage and let their employees have drinks of water and so on, why would it be any worse than like any other job?
It's a good question. I never had a paid house cleaner because when I could have probably used one the most when my children were small, I couldn't afford one. And then as it became more financially thinkable, something about it bothered me. And I didn't know what it was. Something about somebody cleaning up after me bothered me. And I didn't understand that until I held one of these jobs. And then I thought, I don't want to be on either end of this relationship. Now, my house may not meet Dutch standards of cleanliness, but, there have been no outbreaks of plague. It's all right. And I think, to me, it's a hard question. Yes, of course, if you pay a person decently and treat them with respect, fine. It's just another job. But at another level, I feel as a feminist, I want to raise the question of what kind of relationships develop between a woman and the person who cleans for her, who is often another woman, or for that matter, a man, and the person who cleans for him, especially as more and more of these people are immigrant workers in the United States, Mexicans, Caribbeans, so on, here, North Africans, Eastern Europeans. And what worries me there, the thing that I can most easily put into words, is that the effect this has on the children of the household, who can easily begin to think there are certain kinds of things that are more appropriate for darker-skinned people to do, or for people whose English is not so good to do. And that it can implant those kinds of racial and national prejudices very early. I'd rather see the children do some cleaning, frankly. Child labor, bring it back.
You mentioned in your book that when you were a cleaning person, that you were hardly ever talked to by the people who lived in the house.
Yeah, they are remarkably contemptuous toward us, which was painful to observe and to be at the other end of.
Mm-hmm. Two last questions, unfortunately. The lady over there.
Hi, sorry, I'm an American, you can tell from my height. My last question is about consumerism. I found that in the States, a lot of the information that I've been given about joining grassroots movements is always to be conscious about how you act as a consumer in the marketplace. But there's not a lot of information on how to do that well. There's just a lot of information on what not to buy. And I gave up finally on trying to find equitable gym shoes and had to take up swimming. I'm sort of wondering if you have suggestions about, especially with your experiences with Walmart. A lot of my friends my age don't shop at Walmart, but there aren't a lot of alternatives, So I wonder what you, and maybe also as an employer of housekeepers, both as an employer and as a consumer, what suggestions you have?
Well, I think as an employer, there's more you can do. I mean, you can pay decently. If you're hiring a service to provide your cleaning person, find out what they pay. That really irks me, as I know I have friends who have cleaning services and they complain of how much they can pay to the cleaning service without asking what it pays its workers. So anyway, you can do that. But I don't, as I said, if the unions call a boycott of Walmart, I will of course observe it and urge other people, but no boycott has been called. I urge people, in fact, to just be disruptive shoppers. Go in, and while you're there, first you can get T-shirts that say on them that Walmart workers, like everybody else, has a right to unionize. Say it in big letters. And you can demand to meet with the manager. Say you're here, and while you're here, you'd like to talk to the manager about allegations about Walmart's labor practices. Just, be a nuisance. Be a pest.
But they will evict you.
Oh, fine. Go with a group of people. Go, have 50 people go together and do this. Buy. Yeah, and let them do it.
But you think purchasing power then is more of a myth? The idea that...
Well, I think we kind of, because we are a consumerist cultures, that we tend to think that that's how we can express ourselves politically too. And, of course we should try to find out about everything, but like our clothes, the conditions they're made in, that's a terrible thing to think about. And, we keep raising these issues. But don't just do it in a private way of making a private moral decision. Make a fuss. Be obnoxious.
The gentleman over there.
Right. I'm not American, I'm Dutch. I have a question, more of a general nature. You have explained, I think, very clearly to me at least, how the social fabric of America has become so polarized, particularly between the rich and the poor, and the 25% figure, I think, is quite alarming. Now, if you look at history, there are quite some interesting examples, or alarming examples, of this polarization, which has ended up in an explosive environment. You only have to think about the French Revolution and things like that. Now, in order to prevent that we a situation can avoid such an explosion, how would you see America trying to get to that voting solution as fast as possible and not have a repeat of the last few elections? Where the majority
Free elections
actually,
in the United States?
Where the majority actually, in my view, has not really spoken.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's the problem of the actual vote counting, which is, there were just very disturbing stories from Ohio and Florida this last time.
Which didn't make the papers. And
Some did, but not enough. Then the other problem, though, is how do you get people to vote? And the working poor tend not to vote. They don't, because they don't feel that it's going to make any difference, or that politicians represent their issues, or
But there have
whatever.
been enormous get-out-the-vote drives in exactly these states that you mentioned.
Yeah, we did, but we didn't do enough. I think I should mention another factor here in the United States, which looms very large in our political future, and that is the Christian right. And they have a huge social infrastructure. They're able to get out the vote and get it out for a particular candidate. The other thing that I have observed and been written about recently is that they have become an alternative source of social services for many people. These are not the mainstream like Lutherans or Methodists or Presbyterians. These are the non-denominational evangelical churches which tend to be very conservative in their politics. And they very often, though, provide child care, English as a second language lessons, groups, support groups for battered women, support groups for unemployed people, help with disabled children, getting resources for a disabled child. They are becoming an alternative social welfare state in the same way that Hamas is in the Palestinian territories. That we're moving in where there's a vacuum that the state has left, providing your own services that build loyalty around those. What is sinister about the Christian right-wing evangelical social welfare services is they're tied to a kind of politics which is opposed to public services. It's fine. Churches should be constantly giving to the poor and helping people. But when you do it tied with the message, vote for George Bush to stop creeping socialism, then you can see the direction things are going.
I have a last question, a final question. You also already mentioned your the new book that you worked on. You mentioned the subject, but can you tell a little bit of how you went about? Because, as I understand, you again went undercover now as somebody who applied for a white-collar job.
Mm-hmm.
What What were
Well,
the
I
results?
had to be much more undercover. I mean, I wasn't undercover with nickel and dimed because I was using my own name. But I changed my name for the purposes of this project, and I had a fake resume, which I didn't have to have in nickel and dimed. I was just really curious about the corporate world after my nickel and dimed experiences. What goes on there? I didn't get in. I can't really answer the question. Strangely, nobody wanted me.
What sort of firms did you apply for?
Probably 200, including most of the major pharmaceutical firms and a lot of health-related firms, because that was.
But you're a biologist. Why didn't they hire you?
Well, I didn't get the PhD down. That must be it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I was applying as a PR person, because that goes with being a writer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did. It was fascinating.
So we can read all about that.
And to tell you the truth, I missed waitressing.
Thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Barbara Ehrenreich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara Ehrenreich, for giving us, I think, a very clear and gloomy picture. Thank you, Jan, for preparing a beautiful introduction and moderating the discussion. Thank you, audience, for having these relevant questions. Barbara Ehrenreich will sign her books, which are on sale there by Boekhandel Atheneum. In just a moment, I think she will stay here on the stage. But before I let you go, I want to say a few words about the John Adams Institute, which brought you here tonight. We'll continue to bring you the lectures in 2005, and we can only offer that with your support. We are 95% privately funded and truly cannot do without you. For just 20 euros, you can become a supporter of the John Adams Institute, and at our information stand just outside there, you can find out how to do that. You can also sign up for our next lecture with Pauline Maier on the 21st of February. Her talk, entitled The Everlasting American Dream, will be about the history of the American Revolution and her historiography in America. Furthermore, as the information stand will tell you, we can offer you a glance at our book projects and other activities planned to celebrate 225 years anniversary of John Adams setting foot on Dutch soil. Holland was only the second country, believe it or not, to recognize the newly independent United States of America, and Adams made that possible, and also obtained a huge loan of 5 million guilders to build that new nation. So that's for those of you who don't know that story yet. Again, you can find out much more about our activities for that special year 2005 at our information stand. For now, thank you all for coming. The bar will be open, and please have a safe journey home. Thank you all for coming.